the...
Give me a hug, man.
You're looking great, man.
That album was kind of a surprise to me that he put that together. And he dug up some of our things we used to do at his apartment when we lived on Pine Street. One or two of them were recorded by amateur engineers just to hear what was going on, not worried about the quality of the sound and the recording. Anyone that hears the album can see the difference of each tune that we play. It's in different atmospheres and places. The quality of our sound varies a lot. Overlook or hear the quality of the recordings, then you could really enjoy the album. I think it was a good album. He has some other things that he may surprise me with someday. Who knows? Yeah, he was getting sick. My wife was pregnant. We didn't see each other for a while because I had my hands filled. He called me up one day out of the clear blue, and we met at some bar around his neighborhood. He was asking me questions about the past. I was trying to help him with his memory as much as I could. We would talk for hours. His memory started coming back with his music. He got a trio together or a quartet and went traveling again, and we didn't see each other for a while. I was working like locally with had like a trio. My wife and I put a little business together where I had a recording studio, and I would sell music for TV and commercials and stuff like that, and radio commercials. I needed to do something because I didn't want to go out on the road again. You know, my son was born. You know, that was another surprise in my life too. It was a lot going on when he was born. Matter of fact, I won an award for one of my 60-second music section for this commercial for one of the airlines, TWA, or one of those. I won a second place Addy Award. It's fun. I mean, it's not like playing jazz. It's like putting together a puzzle. You know, you only have like 30 or 60 seconds to put a whole piece together that's going to rhyme with whatever the product is. In jazz, you have a structure you work around. What Ron and I did, we totally disregarded any structure. No time signature, no key, just pure improvisation. That all stemmed from when we met back in the early 70s. I met him through Pat. Ron was teaching, was either Temple or Penn. And then him and I were sort of like on the same wavelength. We wanted to break the tradition of jazz and go outside certain structures and see what would happen. And that's how Galaxy was born. It's 4 pieces that we did for a friend of Ron's from Germany. The name of the company was Zero Moving Company. And it was a group of ballet and modern jazz dancers got together and did an improv on classical dancing, if I'm using the right term. They asked Ron if we could put some kind of music that would be freestyle and just more or less like little islands of music that they could dance to. You know what I mean? Once we started, the music would go to different places. It coincided with their freestyle of dancing and our freestyle of playing. He took the music and the dancers, put it together. They made a film, and he took it all around Europe in colleges and to promote his dance company. They filmed it and recorded it at the same time. But I never got to see the whole performance, you know, with the music and everything, because we were too busy creating the music, you know. We set up and everything. I mean, we were both kind of nervous because these are our time signatures that you usually don't play it. Some of the stuff we were doing was kind of, awkward. Who the hell plays in 10/8, 7/4, 6/8, you know, and all that stuff. Usually it's straight ahead 4/4 jazzes, you know. we tried to mix the Eastern with the Western music. We weren't sure if it was going to work. Here we had just a tambour player droning through all of that. Then Richard, had his thing to do, and Charles, a great, great drummer. To us, it was a success. It worked. Had little trouble with one tune because of the time signature change. It goes from 7/4 to 6/8. That was called Baiyina. No, we did it in one take, except for one Israfel. We had to do a double take on that one, and we did the best we could. Someone who plays an instrument could tell where he had to catch up and all that stuff. But who can tell? I mean, the signature itself is so wide open once you start playing. You have to start counting like everything is one. Don't try to count 16. It's hard to do it that way. That's the way I did it anyway. I heard everything is one count. I moved right to Harrisburg, playing with Al Britt Quintet, and I worked with him for about 8 or 9 months. And I came back to Philly after that and joined the Betty Burgess. She's an organ player. Her husband's a drummer from Texas, LJ, his name we called him. Believe it or not, we didn't last too long in the business. I lost the lease. The guy I was subleasing to has a big argument with the landlord. So they dropped the lease. Here I am, I'm stuck. I just put all my money into building the studio. I was pretty broke, and I didn't bother to continue the business afterwards. Plus, they broke into my studio right before I moved, and they stole a nice L5, a couple other guitars, Ovations. I had an acoustic one and an electric acoustic. They took that plus my TAC, 8-track, and luckily I had insurance. I got some money back, but I'll never recover what I lost. It was fun trying to be an engineer. I mean, I had no real experience. I sort of learned that on my own, like I did music. Just trial and error. Jesus was still a carpenter. My father was the foundation of my career. He loved playing banjo and guitar. He was from Italy. He was half blind. At 15, he joined the Merchant Marines to get away from his father. When he got to the States, he jumped ship and never went back. His brothers were already over in Connecticut. When he jumped ship, that's where he went to Connecticut and lived with his brothers under a false name. Back then, a Great Depression was on. The only thing he could do was he knew how to play a banjo. My uncles got him a job with a circus in a minstrel show where he had to have a black face and with the white lips. And he would sit there and play the banjo behind whoever the MC was. That's the way things were back then. It was crazy. During the war, there were no jobs. Everybody was on public assistance. Everybody had allowances, and that's how you lived back then. Oh my God. I'm talking about 1937. One pair of sneakers for the summer and a pair of shoes for the winter. That was it. That was my wardrobe, my attire for my feet.
Until there was no soles left.
Yeah.
That's when you get
Well, that's when we
shoes.
cut out cardboard and stuck in as piece of rubber, whatever, insert. Now I was only 7, 8 years old, so everybody was poor. But anyway, get back to these sessions that went on at my house almost every night. Every neighbor, everybody knew how to play a guitar, a banjo, or a harmonica. And singers, we had 1 million singers. Everybody would flop over to our house. These big sessions would go on, okay? Imagine, 3 or 4 banjo players, 14 guitar players. It was just nuts. My father was in love with Les Paul, thought he was the greatest thing that ever happened to guitar. And that's what I grew up with, listening to Les Paul and Django Reinhardt, which I thought was one of the greatest players in duets I ever heard. And I'm talking about early Django, early, when it was just him and the guitar player and Stefan Grappelli. It knocked me for a loop when I heard these guys. My father would play Les Paul albums, you know, even before he got together with Mary Ford. I had the whole third floor to myself because all my sisters got married and moved out. Two of my brothers were in the service. I'd set up an old recording machine. I played my father's guitar. It was a Gibson Jumbo, 1948. Unfortunately, my father gave it away while I was in the service. He didn't realize what he had. My first guitar was a Fender Esquire. Had one pickup where the pickguard is, plus an amplifier. Bought from a neighbor. Actually, my father and I put our pennies together and we paid this guy every week. That's when I got serious about playing guitar. I stopped playing the banjo. I wanted to play. My father brought out that Gibson Jumbo. It was gorgeous to begin with, and the sound was so big because it was a full size acoustic. I just loved the sound of it. Neighbors came over, they played it and everything. One guy came over with a D'Angelico, worth a fortune today. It was nothing back then. Everybody who had a D'Angelico, Gibsons, good quality guitars back then in the 30s, 40s. This guitar here goes back to the early 70s, right around the time Pat started his group, Joyous Lake. I don't remember for sure whether it was the first album or the second album. He did a solo on this guitar. It went through the mill since then. He ended up giving it to me because on the way home from the studio, he punched a hole in the bottom of it. And it went through hell since then. But it still plays. It's great sound. It needs a little work though, the neck. When I was doing commercials, I used it a lot. It's a con. This guitar here, how I acquired this was Pat was having a rehearsal with the band Joyous Lake, a rehearsal studio in New York. Les Paul comes barging in with a guitar case and he takes this out and he says, Pat, this is one of our newer models we're pushing for Gibson. He says, I played it, I had it for a while. He said, I want to give it to you. He says, let me know what you think of it. Another guitar maker, a Brazilian guitar maker, made him a solid body guitar. It weighed a ton. He gave this to me and started playing the handmade one. Les did some work on it. He had a box attached to this when he was using it, so he can get any kind of sound he wanted. This is a pretty versatile guitar. I mean, it has three toggle switches to it. Every time you move one, you get a different sound. You know, move that there, move that here, new sound, new sound, new sound. Then you got another one over here. New sound, new sound, new sound. I mean, it just goes on and on. You know, you change combinations. But Pat never got used to it, so he asked me if I wanted it. So I said, sure. And that's how I ended up with this guitar. This Ibanez is a sweet little guitar. The sound is close to an ES-175. This was given to me by a new friend. Actually, I know him by his music. When I was on the road, I used to take this little record player with me for my own entertainment, you know, after the gig. It looked like a little suitcase. The lid was a speaker. And then you had your turntable. And it was all right. It was sufficient. And an album came out, Eddie Harris, Exodus to Jazz. They played all the themes from a movie called Exodus. On this album with Eddie was his guitar player, Joe DiOrio. And I just loved his sound. I loved the way he played. That was one of my favorite albums back then. And I listened to him for a long time. It ends up, the group that Joe was working with, Joe was leaving. They called Pat. And Pat says, I'm doing something right now. So they asked him, he said, you know anybody else that can cut the gig? And he asked me if I wanted to do it. So I wasn't busy then. Pat was busy with Joyous Lake, and I took the gig. Anyway, we took Joe DiOrio's place. Up until this past year, Joe DiOrio had we had a mutual friend, it turns out, and Joe asked about me, and this mutual friend gave me his phone number, and I called Joe, and I told him, I said, I've been a fan of yours since 1962, and we started talking and all of this. We became good friends. He told me what I was playing, and I said, "Oh, I just have the solid body. Some of my other guitars were stolen. The last L5 I had, I gave to a real close friend of mine because I wasn't going to travel no more. This kid really loved the L5, so I gave it to him. Joe ended up sending me this guitar because he said, you don't need an amplifier for the semi-hollow, and that's how I got this guitar. It's really top of the line Ibanez, really a good box. There's two types of players. There's the ones that like to just sing and play for their own enjoyment. Then you have your more serious musician. If you want to be a pro, you have to eat, sleep, shit, and piss music. I took my guitar everywhere, including bed, bathroom, and beyond. I just wanted to play 24 hours a day. I couldn't get enough. If you could just put the time in, you could become the musician you think you could be, or not. If you're not that serious about it, just stay home and entertain yourself.